All righty, well, let's get to it. This is the cover of the book, which you all have just bought. I credit in the book Lorraine Jean at the Frame Shop for creating the cover, which I thought was kind of neat. The other major thing that she did for me was, if you've ever done this stuff, the font in which the text is critical. And I was using something called Comic Sans, and she said, no. This is all now in Garamond. So if you do these things, think Garamond. That map at the lower left, which is on the back of the book, we will have occasion to talk about shortly. Okay, some of you may remember Dick McQuiggan, great guy, but Dick did a great deal, especially with the cemetery, which we get to at the end. He did a lot of other stuff, but he comes up particularly at that. Oh, and the usual cast of characters and credits. Okay, we're going to be really quick here, brief history of the movement. There's probably a third or a quarter. The first part of the book is about that. And then we move to what you really came to hear is something about Marlborough and especially Hudson's Poor Farm. Now, the first thing, what the hell was it? Well, if you travel, here's Hudson, downtown. If you travel Main Street here, east, towards Stowe and Sudbury, you know Lower Main Street where the self-storage is. It is where the current rail trail is being developed and crosses. It is right there, right at that spot. And this is the map that's on the back of the book, and it's also in the book. To put you again, here's Lower Main Street. For Julian's Orchard and Gospel Hill up off to the left there. Lower Main Street. Here is the new rail trail crossing. Perkins, which has recently been sold, so that name is not quite right, but nevertheless, that's where the sand pit is. It isn't quite that big, but it's right there. Rich's Auto Salvage. Dave Rich is now running it. Kane Industrial Drive, and then the American Heritage Museum, which I hope people have been to. It is truly world class. You may not care for war stuff, but it's something you really must see if you have not done it. Lake Boone is over here, and the black rectangle right here is where the extra space storage is located. You'll see some aerials of this, and it was on that very site that the buildings existed. Brook Street, Sauter Farms down here with the town ball fields, and then the very nice Sauter Farm development itself. Let's see what else. Parmenter Road over here, if you're familiar with that area. We'll have occasion to mention all of these again. Well, here's a recent satellite photo, and here is Main Street here. Here is the rail trail there. And here's the extra space storage buildings. Guess you call them buildings. And we'll talk more about this in a moment, but there were really two buildings that defined the Poor Farm. One was a barn, and secondly, a house. Right here is a line, I think it's mostly pines, right here, which I've outlined. Whoops. The reason I do that is you'll see these again, so it's kind of helpful to locate those on the map. If you travel this area at all, this is a very familiar view going west. Dave Rich's Auto Salvage is here, and Kane Drive is probably right about here. And that would be the rail trail crossing. So that's what we're talking about. That's the specific area. And of course, that's the Extra Space Storage, which is a very large company. Okay, just a quick chronology. What I've done in the book, hopefully it's helpful, is at the end of the two sections, the first one on poor farm movement and then the one in Hudson, is I have a timeline, just hitting the highlights of dates and roughly what happens. But notice when we're talking about early, mid-1700s, it's a long time ago, coming up not too far in the mid-2000s, so what, 300 years? And then it continues on down into present day, and we'll talk about a few of these things on the way. The name Vanjie, for anybody who was here more than 10 years ago, or actually a lot more than that now, it was a very familiar name, played a key role in this whole thing. Now, how did poor farms actually work? What they were, we'll get to, but how did they work? Well, don't you love it? The names changed. They loved lunacy. It was a very common term in those days. It doesn't exist anymore. We've done away with lunacy. But nevertheless, the state was much involved in this. And then city or towns, it was early decided that it was not a federal concern. There was Franklin Pierce, you all remember him. Yes, Franklin Pierce. Anyway, 1850s, he vetoed a bill that made it a responsibility of the federal government. No, he said no, so it never has been that. So the city or town, and what a city or town would do would be to hire what they called overseers of the poor. And you'll see a number of their reports. Usually 3, sometimes 5 prominent citizens who would manage the farm and hire employees. And the building, so-called town farm, it went through a variety of names, but they would hire a warden and a wardeness if he was married, and they tried to make it married. And then at the bottom are the residents. Called them inmates. Kind of gives you a feel for what was going on here. Now, we got two sort of diversions here. For people who were not in a city or town, and there was major efforts, legal efforts, to make sure that nobody lived in town who didn't own in town and pay taxes. Otherwise, you were, quote, warned out. Take a hike. They went off to the state hospitals. Worcester State housed many of these. And on the other side, outdoor relief, that meant maintaining people in their own homes. But that was frowned on. That was never a favored way to deal. Okay, well, I'm going to zip through these because a number of these are in the book and you can read them. But the state was interesting how they phrased some of these. A little difficult, but bear with me. They inventoried the towns, how many people you got, why are they in there, where do they come from, you know, all that sort of stuff. But this was from Boston. And setting aside the sentenced boys, sent here for truancy, petty thefts, and so forth, 9/10 of the remainder are through the influence of the use of intoxicating liquor by the parents. This was the heyday of the temperance movement. The great and almost the only cause for so much poverty and distress in the city can be traced to the use of intoxicating drink, either by husband or the wife, or both of them. Over here, let's see, where are we? In Gloucester, we have had in our almshouse this year 46 inmates, 26 of the adults were there in consequence of the use of intoxicating liquors. Let's see. And in Harvard, 46 directly or indirectly from intoxicating liquors. You get the idea. It just went on and on. Yeah, they inventoried cities and towns. They sent out actually a postcard and said who's in there and how many and how long have they been, what are their names, how old are they, all that sort of thing. And I'm just trying to give you a picture of how we thought about these. Cases in the lunatic hospitals, Ipswich receptacles, state workhouse, and state almshouse maintained at your cost. They were trying to find out how many of these people are there in these. A major study was done by a gal, if you're into literature, her pseudonym was Alice French. But interestingly, she was from here, but lived in Alabama for some reason, but wrote several articles in the Atlantic Monthly, a major magazine of the day. This is 1881. So as a matter of fact, the great majority of indoor paupers belong to what are called the lowest classes and seek the almshouse, not because of unmerciful disaster, but because of very common vices. Between half and 2/3 of them are of foreign birth. Beginning to sound familiar?
Yeah.
The examination, not only foreign birth, but it's hereditary. And sorry to read this, but it's a liberal lesson put down 1/10 of the paupers to have come from people deserving of sympathy. The other 9/10 are in the almshouse because they have not wit enough or energy enough to get into prison. Such people do not have a hard life in the almshouse. The squalor does not disturb men and women who have known nothing else. The immorality is a temptation. And even in the worst kept houses, there is usually plenty to eat and little to do. In any case, they have not the heavy and irksome task of thinking for themselves.
Good life there, huh?
Yeah, and muck around.
Yeah.
Well, we had a lot of them, but especially in Massachusetts, which was the larger of the states. But they were counting the number of poor farms in the different towns. Let's see, Vermont, let's see, Connecticut 60, Maine 79, Mass 137, Rhode Island 19, Vermont 38. 1925. Okay. All right, well, let's talk about our poor farm. Now, as you all know, Hudson was a part of Marlborough until 1866. And in 1916, we celebrated our the sesquicentennial. But anyway, so this is all. Prior to that, everything was essentially Marlborough. Growing sediment. This was from Marlborough's warrant. February 1799, almost turn of the century. The town bought the dwelling, 1/4 acre of land of Hannah Goodale. Goodale, a familiar name in Hudson. The place was located on the west side of Washington Street. Washington Street, let's see the map, beyond the railroad crossing and so forth. Now, that's as close as we can do it. Now, we do have this map of Marlborough, 1803. Now, you have to bear with me a little bit, so take a little bit of think. It's all in the book. Here's downtown. Here's the Assabet flowing down this way. This is the town line. This, by the way, over here is Worcester County, so there's nothing over there. We don't care about that at all. So here is Washington Street. Now, in cursive text, these here list houses. And this is Lovewell Brigham. But here is the townhouse of presumably Jonathan Waters, up here. And this is approximately where the rail trail will cross. It's a guess, but it's somewhere up there because it was based on a word description, not a map description. And you really can't measure much on here. They don't even have the rods, which are distances between things. Okay, 1821, see if the town will sell that place, the old pauper establishment. That was the term typically used, was the establishment, the actual building. At Sandy Hill and where Waters lives. The committee, let's get rid of it. Well, I think most of you, if you're familiar at all with Hudson, will recognize this. This is the McDonald's up on Washington Street, not there used to be one down at the river. And here is the rail trail that crosses right here. And this somewhat elevated area I take to be Sandy Hill. It may or may not be. There is some bedrock outcropping here, but the rest of it seems kind of sandy. At any rate, it's as close as I can come from the available info of where that initial poorhouse used to be. We then move to 1801. Now in 1801, we have a map, which is actually a rather valuable map because it's a line map, which is very popular in those days. And it was literally a line with some annotations along the line. No distances. But we do know some things from this map. And the main thing we know is Robert Hunter is right here. He will become very important. But this is, well, let's figure this out. This is Main Street here. This is Gospel Hill up here. For Julian's farm, just on the east side of that. Jacob Jewell, this was called the Jewell District, although I don't think we use that term much anymore. It's where the Kane Farm and so forth is. Where Fort Meadow Brook runs to the north, up to the river here. Lake Boone will appear over here. Now, if we look, this doesn't quite look like the current Main Street, which is pretty much like this. And what the cartographer, surveyor did here, he's got a note as the road now runs. And what happened is, there's the railroad, this is Brook Street. And if you can visualize driving past self-storage and Kane and so forth, you go straight, Brook Street splits off to the left, and then down by Sodom. Well, it didn't used to. This was a fairly recent, the original was Brook Street. And then later, what they were trying to do, of course, was avoid having to go across the width of Fort Meadow and the swamp down there. And then he notes down, if we do this, how much we're going to save and so forth. Very interesting, interesting sketch. Okay, well, the size of the poor farm, sorry for kind of jumping around here, but it's the way it is. Here's Lake Boone, here's Lower Main Street, and the heavy line is approximately, as best I can figure it, the dimensions of the poor farm, which was quite large, 300 or 400 acres, going practically to the river, which doesn't show here, but it's up here to the north. Below Main Street, not quite over, but perhaps over to Parmenter Road. It's a little hard to tell there. Now we're beginning to get a map that you can recognize. This is the 1835 of Marlborough. It's the northeast corner of it. These are all in the book. Here's the town line here. Here is what is now Main Street, Lower Main Street, or in those days the Boston and Holden Post Road. Here is the pauper establishment here. This is Brook Street, and there's another Hunter over there. We haven't mentioned Hunter yet, but David Hunter and Edward Hunter, his father, were the first to come and settle this area a very long time ago. Now, much of what we know about this area comes from a couple of court cases. The first court case in the 1830s, thereabouts, of which there is no real record, because in those days the trial courts, they didn't keep any records and all that sort of thing. There is a little bit, but not much. But in any event, the major court case is this one, and this is a federal court case. What happened is the Hunters lost the first court case in the 1820s, 30s, somewhere in through there. So one of the sons said he moved to New Hampshire to be able to sue in federal court, because it has to be between states. So this, which is online, oh, you can have fun reading this guy. It's 550 pages about wills and trusts and estates and all of that. Incredibly boring stuff. But for this case, they took depositions, which are not reprinted here, but the depositions are in the Federal Record Center in Trapelo Road in Waltham. And if you haven't been there, it's really quite fascinating. But I went there and spent a lot of time in those days trying to Xerox some of that stuff. The depositions are interesting because it describes the land, which is I was much more interested in. And the handwriting actually is quite readable. Sorry it isn't here because of size, but what happened here. Now, for that court case, in those records, there is this map that was made, presumably, for the court case. So this was very, very helpful. Here is what is Lower Main Street. This is probably where Brook Street splits off to the left. A little hard to tell. But we have the outline. And this is the marshland, swamplands to the north, up around the Assabet, where I don't think, no, this one they didn't show Fort Meadow Brook, but it goes up somewhat like this. And it kind of zigs and zags up here. There's a question of barn or establishment. I think they've got it reversed here. But there was some movement between different sides of the establishment. The barn was always a barn in the early days. People did not live in that. It was for the animals and farm tools. Over here, there is a notation and a small square, and it's labeled small house occupied by the Hunter heirs. Now what happened, and I don't think I said this to begin with, the land was originally of Edward Hunter, mid-1700s. So things started cooking around the early 1800s when Marlborough abandoned that place up on Washington Street. And it's not clear why they wound up here, but they did. So they tried to either did buy or attempted to buy land of Edward Hunter. Okay, what happened here is that at least David the son and maybe some others decided that they were getting gypped from Marlborough, didn't get enough money or land or whatever, so they sued. That was the first case. And that case they lost. And that's when David moved to New Hampshire to sue in federal court some years later. Now this, there are rods along here, and rod is a distance. Everybody knows how long a rod is. Tony, help us out.
16.5 feet.
16 and a half feet. We don't use rods much anymore. And this is not quite to Parmenter Road, because we know where these were. And he didn't really put rods along the entire thing, so it's a little vague. but it was probably somewhere between, I'm trying to think of where the, some of those businesses are along on the south side between the establishment and Parmenter Road. So he was moved down here. This is the title. It's in the book. Okay, enough of that. This is a picture, a fabulous picture, by the way, the best one we've got, of the first poorhouse building. It was built probably by the town of Marlborough, even though this is dated 1894 and 5. We know that because it lists down here the warden, and we have a list of the wardens and the time they served as wardens and wardeness, Mr. and Mrs. Baker. And there are a couple of inmates in the picture as well. Quite a nice building, quite a sizable building. But as you read through, you discover they had maybe 6, 7, 8, 10 people, and they had a very large, and a lot of these were really large buildings. But anyway, here is the original poor farm, and here is the barn over here to the left. I think I put a, yeah, that's the barn. That barn lasted until it was torn down in the 80s, 1980s. Now, this is a key date, 1894-95, because something happened here. And Rob O'Hare of Hudson Fire Department, the historian there, has done quite a bit of work. And what did you discover about this, Rob?
Well, the young girl, Nellie Reddy, she was born and raised here in Hudson. She lived at the corner of Cox and what we know now as Manning. It was Maple Street at the time. And when she was 16, her father had a fire in his barn. When she was 20, he had a fire in his house. When she was 25, she was living in the Alms house and pregnant. In the December of 1896, she gave birth to a little boy that didn't live but 15 minutes. And then in February of 97 is when she burned down the poor farm. Her parents couldn't afford or wouldn't pay for her bail, and she went to court, and they sent her to the insane asylum in Medfield, and she spent 49 years in Medfield, insane asylum, mental hospital, state hospital, and she's buried at St. Michael's after that.
Interesting. And I'm glad that Bob came up with this, because this is as far as I got, and then he approached me and said, whoa, there's more to the story. Okay, well, on the front of your book, there are 3 pictures, and this is one. This is the building that was erected the next year, I mean, right away. So this was the poor farm, and it's quite a large building, needless to say, here, with a back. Now, we do have, and it's reprinted in there, and it's fairly lengthy, it's about a page and a half or 2 pages, description of this building, what's inside it. And as far as I can see, it never held more than 5, 6, 8 people. And how do we know that? Well, we do have lists of inmates and how long they lasted. And I think I mentioned it one, yeah, this is the beginning of that article. The article was written in 1936, I think, something like that, when this was still there. This building lasted until 70s, 1970s, somewhere in through there. But at any rate, we do have quite a bit of info on expenses. That's what the overseers really got carried away with, was the expenses. It's in the town reports, and also the names of people, how old they were, And if you go through several, you can see how long they were at the Poor Farm. They talked about personal property at the almshouse. This is 1884. I put this one up particularly because I thought this was a scream.
Right.
50 cents a head.
Yeah.
So, but it mostly had to do with food supplies primarily and things related. Farming tools, household furniture. And one of the things that one of the main products was cordwood, because they could get people to cut cordwood. They didn't have to know anything, they just needed a body. Inmates. We find this, interestingly, a lot are, of course, individuals, but there were families. Kerrigan family. And there were quite a number of families, not surprisingly, that there would be families.
Who were the tramps?
Tramps were people who came and went. Sometimes they call them rounders. They just made the rounds of different places. There were all kinds of terms that were used. Yeah, beyond that. Oh, okay. They tried to be sympathetic, to be sure helpless little children, whether settled here or elsewhere, have claim on the town. It's a pleasure for us to serve them. More especially to those who during a season of prosperity have no thought of future needs or the comfort of their families. Their chief aim is seemingly to gratify their own appetites and desires, feeling that should they fall into distress, the town will kindly care for them. And the point is, screw them. So, now, not all of the people in a town farm were from the town. A number of them were from other places. Here's a letter from Brockton saying, we got a Hudson person, pay us. And there was a lot of that going on. People were in different towns for different reasons. So,
Hence the tramps.
yeah, and we have quite a number of these letters at the society. Oh, rules for the inmates. Yeah, you get a kick out of this. Duty of the superintendent may see that all the inmates labor at such times in such a way they may direct. Nobody permitted to lead an idle life. Nobody here is leading an idle life, I'm trusting. Otherwise you'd wind up in the poor farm. The superintendent, no drink. The only one who could prescribe that was the doctor, and they did hire doctors for this. Because the railroad, which came through now this is the Central Mass line, which came from Boston, North Station, all the way to Northampton, came through here in 1880. Not the first one. We had other lines coming nearby Lake Boone earlier. But what happened, of course, these were steam locomotives, and early on they were the boiler was fueled by wood or coal, and of course the problem is that created a lot of sparks, which went up and out, and especially along the area, if you're familiar, there's a lot of pines. There were a lot of pines in those days. And there were lots of fires that happened, especially from there towards Lake Boone. And in my family, which is on Lake Boone, the house that grandfather bought went up in flames. And that's in the Lake Boone book, and I well remember Mother, who was probably 10, she was born in 7, so in 17 when the house burned, the men took all the women and the kids, put them in boats, put them up into the lake. And there was a lot of that going on. And of course, the railroad got sued a lot and didn't pay all that much, but forest fires, something down here. Yeah, well, there's kind of a snipe that the only crop they had was cordwood, something like this. Okay, a little later on, here's Lower Main Street. This is 1908. Here is the rail line. And notice, here's the town farm, here's the establishment, the actual building, and then the barn, and cultivated land pretty much all around. And this is from 1908. 1910, well, prohibit further publishing of names. So after that, you kind of lost track of who was actually in the poor farms themselves. They hired physicians, and is this the one? Yes, Dr. Thomas Tierney. If anybody remembers, longtime Hudson Tierney is a familiar name. Anybody remember Marty Tierney in the schools? Some of you will. Yeah. Then after a while, somebody got the bright idea, geez, let's not call them workhouses or town farms. Let's call them infirmaries, which changed the name but didn't change the approach. And this is the article that's reprinted about that building, but it's published in 34. Okay, well, we got a couple aerials that kind of bring us up to date. Here is one, actually quite old, 1931. Thanks, Alan. Here is the railroad, which was functioning in 1931, but slowing down. It's amazing how long ago these were abandoned. B&M pulled out in 1939. I mean, a long time ago that railroads were in decline. Here is Main Street. Here is Parmenter Road. This will be Ordway Station, for those of you familiar with it. And down here is the town farm, poor farm complex. Problem is, when you zoom in, it pixelates, and you can't get the resolution that you need. But we did the best we can. Here is Main Street. Here is the railroad. Here. And this is cultivated land on both sides of the railroad, but primarily to the south of Main Street. And here are the two buildings. The house to the left and the barn to the right. Now this is 39. Now this gets a lot better resolution because it's much more recent photos. This was a 52 flight taken that McConnell, he was in forestry at UMass, used these to classify land cover across the entire state. One of the first states ever to do this. And I use these a lot in my mapping classes. But here is the Main Street, Brook, Main, the poor farm land, and here are the buildings here.
Where's the cemetery?
The cemetery is going to be right in here, across the street. Get to that in just a moment. Good question. Here's that map. This is not going to be satisfactory, but you'll see the problem. This is that same aerial that was used, but this was done by SCS Soil Conservation Service to map the soils. Not using it for that purpose, but that's what these numbers refer to, is the different soils and soil capabilities. But that's a zoom in on that. If we go zoom in a little further, you begin to see what the problem is. But here is the buildings right here. The barn and the house. And here's the railroad. Ron Rich hasn't established here yet. It's a little before when he got busy. And if you zoom in further, it's just very difficult. And I'm not sure whether that was print over print or was on the photo. I just can't really tell. Okay, well, much more recently, it's a 73 flight. We can get really good resolution. And you remember this, the hedge line of trees, which locates, and by 73, what we have here is just the barn. Lower Main Street, and right here is the cemetery, which we'll see a little bit later. I put this in, and I've had a chat with Tony about this. I don't know whether this, because this was from the WPA days, the Works Progress Administration, colloquially called, we pass along, but in 1939. And we have this photo, and there are some things that suggest this is the house and the barn, but there are other things that don't. I think this is the railroad. And what they were doing, land clearing. That was the justification for this under the WPA. But not spend too much time on that. Well, we have a list of the wardens, which is helpful when we get a photo that we need to date. The last warden and wardeness of the poor farm, McDonald's. Why did the damn horse stand right in front of the building? It's always that way. It's like going into a store. Whatever you want is always in the far back corner of the store. It's incredible. I mean, it's what it is. Hardware, food store, they're all the same. But at any rate, I guess doesn't help, but I think that might be the...
Photographer obviously didn't care about the building.
Evidently not. Okay, this gets us up to early World War II, 1942, a good year. I was born in 42. So by that time, the war was well along. There were lots of people employed in industries, men and women, also in the military, and the whole concept of poor farms kind of went away, and most of them disappeared. There were other...
Had the state taken over responsibility for welfare at that point?
Not really. The feds did more than the states did. But that whole history, the social history of how we handled poor people is an interesting one, but another talk for another day. So they were selling it. Now here is a picture from the 30s. I don't know whether this is one of yours or not. Might be. Remember, you gave me a whole bunch along,
I don't think I had that one.
reconstructing along Main Street.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, clearly, I'm going to say 30s because it resembled other photos, looked just like others that we do have. And that clearly is the building itself. Unfortunately, pines are in the way, but you get what you get. And that you saw earlier. And now we get into post poor farm era, in which the poor farm has been sold, and a variety of uses here. I put this up for those of you who are familiar, you understand it. If you're not, this is the key name associated with the whole poor farm area. There were others, but Vanjie was one of the first. Now, when the farm was sold, it went to the Kings for some few years, and then Vanjie comes along. Very interesting character, if you knew him. He was an auctioneer. He did a lot for the town. Whoops. Yeah, here we are. We're back in the 50s. At auctions in the barn, did lots of it, did all around town as well, not just there. I don't know if this is a Bud Liner, I'm not that much into trains, but it was one of these that obviously ran itself. I mean, we're long past the era of coal and wood burning, so these were diesels. But this is the crossing. Some of you may remember, if you're old enough, the wigwag signal that was there. It was kind of a neat clanging, you know, that sort of thing. And this over here was Laura Svenningsson, who still lives there. Her father had purchased that and put up a small house. And actually, I think the next one, whoops, yeah, this one, is from Laura, and this is her family, mom and dad. She's one of these kids here, and the reason for it, of course, is the barn. It's one of the very few pictures we have. This is so frustrating that there are so few pictures in doing the Lake Boone book. I had virtually no pictures of Monahans. Anybody who knew anything about Lake Boone knew Monahans. A couple of postcards, I got some crummy stuff from the newspaper, but it's just remarkable. It was, I think what happens is it was so obvious and so common, nobody thought to take a picture of the darn thing. A lounge is a lounge, and not only Vanjie, but the other name that we intimately associated, other than the Canes, is Junior Salusi. And we had the, does that reek 70s? I mean, really. Now this, please bear with me. This is 1973. Now, you get a kick out of this. This was out of a fabulous book called The Central Mass Line. March 3, 1973. Number 15, that's the engine, in a 4-car passenger consist, stuck together, from Boston to Wayland. There, the 250-member wedding party from the Sherburne wedding of Ms. Faith Phillips Tiberio to Mr. Robert A. Tedisco boarded the train. From there to Gleasondale, the train served as a rolling receiving line and cocktail reception for the wedding party. The passengers detrained at Gleasondale. I think it must be off Chestnut Street. Boarding buses for the short trip to the Sheraton Tara Motel in Framingham. I didn't think it was such a short trip, but nevertheless, hey, that's what they say. Where the formal reception was held. The train ran on to Hudson, where it remained overnight. The following morning, number 15 ran around her train, coupled to the rear, and ran 10 to 1st back to North Station in Boston. The price tag, $11,500 in 1973. Now, I did look up 11.5 in 73 is worth now. Any guesses?
50. Yeah, about 50,000.
Today it's worth 81.6. So there you go. When the grandkid has the wedding, you know what to do. There you go.
Is that Main Street crossing?
That is, yep. Now, I've got a problem with this picture because I have flipped it several times, several ways. And I don't know, you probably can't read it, but this is backwards. But if I flip the picture, I have the wigwag signal on the wrong side of the tracks. There's a problem. But nevertheless, you get the idea. So I don't think that train is still available, even if you wanted it. Okay, we're just about there. 1977, number of people remember this. It's when the Hudson team did quite well. 1987, inside, we have a few pictures. Oh my God, look at this. That's a young Dave Bonazzoli as bartender. These pictures are from him. So, remember the potbelly stove, which has disappeared. We have hunted everywhere for this thing. Gone. Okay. Banshee did a lot for the town. Died in '86. The Poor Farm barn lasted till '88, and that replaced it. Okay, sorry, real quick. Across the street is the Poor Farm Cemetery. It's the whole story of the cemetery itself and so forth. One of the good things, and this is where Dick McQuiggan comes in big time, he was initiated, the initial work got a hold of the state archivist and archaeologist who came out and did a major report on the Hudson Poor Farm. Unfortunately, this is not available online. Most of these other reports are. New Ed Bell, we did a talk here maybe 10 years ago, and Ed came out. He's still doing this. Great guy. But here is Main Street. Here is the rail trail. And here is what used to be Coro, now Grand Image, that large building on the right if you're coming uptown. And here is the cemetery adjacent. And this will be the sand. You probably recognize this. I don't know whether that sign is still there. This was a little while ago. Here is that patch of trees. If you ever wondered why there was a patch of trees there, you may not have, but next time you go by, you will, because there is a sign here, which I don't think is here. Mike, when did you guys put that up? A couple of years ago?
Well, you have a picture from your book.
Yeah, oh, all right.
It was a monument. There's 2 Revolutionary War soldiers that
Yep.
were buried in the cemetery.
Yep,
And the sons of the American Revolution, 2 of the representatives came out
right,
and
I
spoke to
remember.
the owner about putting a monument sign on the roadside. That's there now. A brass or
Yep.
bronze sign.
Yep. And I know there have been efforts by the Historical Commission to try to, and others, to try to define this, get a surveyor, post, and it's not happened. But that is still there, but it's, if you look on the Grand Image side, the driveway is pretty close. You go around, the driveway's further in and so forth. And we do have a stone, burial stone of that, which I think is in the book as well. It's a great big, heavy, and I mean heavy, 100-odd pounds, fragment broken, but by William Leary, and that's in the book.
How many graves were there?
Unknown,
Unknown.
unknown. How many graves, and when, and who.
So it was the Poor Farm Cemetery, but not to bury folks from the Poor Farm, it's just identifying the location. Is that right?
It was associated, it was a part of the Poor Farm. But what happened down through deeds, it disappeared from the language of the deed. And then when Dick McQuiggan was working on, he urged that it be put back in and so forth. It's difficult, but nevertheless. And I will leave you and release you as inmates, and we're done. Thank you very much.